The crystal chandelier above the private dining room at the Buckhead Club cast a cold, sharp light on the mahogany table. I sat there in my best tailored suit, feeling the rough calluses on my palms against the crisp white linen napkin. Across from me sat my daughter Kendra and her fiancé Andre Sterling. Andre's parents, the Sterlings, flanked them like royal guards protecting a vault. The air was thick with the scent of roasted truffles and an entitlement I could taste in the back of my throat. Mrs. Sterling raised her glass of imported champagne, her heavy diamond tennis bracelet catching the light and flashing in my eyes. To the merger of two great families, she announced, a smile stretched tight across her face, not reaching her cold eyes. I raised my water glass, offering a slow, measured nod. I am Marcus, a master carpenter by trade. I built my life with wood sweat and calluses. I know the strength of a good foundation, but the foundation of this evening felt like it was built on quicksand. Kendra leaned forward, her perfectly manicured fingers sliding a thick, leather-bound binder across the table. The words, "The Wedding of Kendra and Andre," were stamped in heavy gold foil on the cover. It looked less like a celebration of love and more like a corporate takeover document. "We have finalized the numbers, Dad," Kendra said, her voice dropping into a smooth, practiced rhythm. "The venue is secured. We chose the Biltmore estate. It is the only place in Atlanta that meets the Sterling family standards." Andre adjusted his imported silk tie, offering a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "It is all about the aesthetic, Mr. Marcus," he chimed in. "We need the right backdrop for the society pages and our business partners." I opened the heavy binder, feeling the thick, glossy paper under my thumbs. The first page was a spreadsheet. The numbers leaped out at me, sharp and unapologetic. The venue alone was $150,000. The floral arrangements, imported orchids from South America, sat at $40,000. I kept turning the pages, the knot in my stomach pulling tighter with every single line item. I build beautiful homes that last a century for less than what they wanted to spend on a single weekend party. I looked up from the ledger, meeting my daughter's gaze. "Kendra," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "These numbers, they are astronomical. $200,000 for a reception is not a celebration. It is a spectacle." The temperature in the room plummeted instantly. Mrs. Sterling let out a short, sharp gasp, placing her hand over her pearls as if I had cursed in church. "Mr. Marcus," she said, her tone dripping with polished, polite condescension. "In our circle, a wedding is not a mere party. It is a declaration of status. We simply cannot have Andre marrying into a family that cuts corners and embarrasses us in front of the mayor." I did not look at her. I kept my eyes fixed on my daughter, searching for the little girl who used to help me sand down oak cabinets in my workshop. I saw nothing but a stranger wearing designer clothes I did not recognize and a cold expression I had never seen. "What do you need from me, Kendra?" I asked, closing the binder with a heavy thud that echoed in the quiet room. "The plan is set, Dad," she replied, her voice cooling into a transactional monotone. "I have opened a joint wedding account. The Sterlings are covering the rehearsal dinner and the European honeymoon. You just need to fund the main event. It is expected." She did not ask. She commanded. I looked at Andre, who was busy swirling the expensive champagne in his crystal glass, completely unbothered by the extortion happening right in front of him. They were not asking for my blessing. They were demanding my life savings. I felt the old familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. I'd promised Brenda, my late wife, that I would always take care of our little girl. But Brenda never raised a child to treat her father like an endless, thoughtless bank account. I took a deep breath, the air feeling thin and stale in my lungs. "I need to understand this budget," I said, tapping the thick leather cover. "There are line items here for luxury car rentals and a $10,000 ice sculpture. This is a list of absurd demands, not a wedding plan." Kendra slammed her hand on the table, the heavy silverware rattling against the fine bone china. "You just do not get it, Dad," she snapped, her voice rising above the soft jazz playing in the background. "You have spent your entire life covered in sawdust," she hissed, her eyes narrowing with a familiar, cruel precision. "You measure success in inches and 2x4s, but the real world measures it in capital and influence. You sit in your workshop, proud of your little cabinets, while people like the Sterlings shape the actual world. Andre and I are building a brand." She continued, waving her hand toward her new family, who sat perfectly still, observing the demolition of my dignity. "We cannot launch our new life with you dragging us down to the level of a blue-collar laborer." I felt a cold tightness grip my chest, a physical ache that had nothing to do with my age. I looked at her, searching for the daughter Brenda, and I raised the little girl who loved the smell of fresh-cut pine. She was completely gone, replaced by this bitter, calculated stranger. "You are asking for a fortune, Kendra," I said, keeping my voice carefully leveled despite the storm raging inside me. "Where exactly do you expect me to get this kind of money for a 6-hour party?" She leaned back in her leather chair, crossing her arms over her designer dress, as if the answer was incredibly obvious. "The house, Dad." She stated, her voice as casual as if she were discussing the weather. "You live alone in a massive, outdated property. We have already spoken to a premium realtor, and the market in your neighborhood is absolutely peaking right now. You sell the property, you fund the wedding account, and you can downsize to a practical senior apartment." The silence that followed her words was heavier than a poured concrete slab. The Sterlings nodded in quiet unison, murmuring their polite, aristocratic agreement to the complete desecration of my family home. "The house," I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my dry mouth. "You want me to sell the home I built with my own 2 hands, the home where your mother and I laid every brick, the very room where she breathed her last breath just to pay for a country club party?" "It is just wood and brick, Dad," she shot back, rolling her eyes with a dramatic, theatrical exhaustion. "Mom is gone, and you are just clinging to a dead past like a hoarder. You need to be sensible," she lectured, tapping her polished nail against the heavy mahogany table. "Andre and his parents need to know that my family can pull their weight in this social partnership. We cannot have them thinking that I come from a background of poverty and small thinking." She leaned closer, her voice dropping into a vicious private whisper that carried perfectly across the quiet room. "If you cannot provide the capital, then what exactly is your purpose here?" she demanded. "Your entire life," she spat, the venom dripping from every single syllable, "is worthless. You have nothing to show for 40 years of back-breaking labor except calluses and a house you do not even need. You are a relic, Dad. If you cannot do this one simple financial transaction for me, then you are completely useless to my future." The words hung in the air, an irreversible, toxic poison. Andre smirked, taking a slow, deliberate sip of his expensive champagne, silently sealing his approval of my public execution. Mrs. Sterling looked away, feigning a polite disinterest, but a small, satisfied smile played on her thin lips. They were a pack of polished vultures sitting in a high-rise restaurant, waiting to pick my old bones clean. The humiliation was designed to break me, to force my hand through shame and social pressure. I looked at the 3 of them sitting across from me, radiating arrogance and unchecked greed. I did not raise my voice, and I did not offer a single word of defense. An architect does not argue with a structurally compromised beam. He simply documents the failure and prepares for the demolition. The silence stretched across the table, thick and suffocating. I looked into Kendra's eyes, searching for a flicker of hesitation, a single drop of regret. There was nothing. The little girl who used to hold my rough hands, the teenager who cried on my shoulder when she broke her first heart, was completely dead. Sitting in her place was a polished, ruthless stranger. A woman who measured a father's love in bank transfers and property deeds. I felt a profound, freezing clarity wash over my chest. The grief of losing my child was suddenly eclipsed by the cold logic of an engineer facing a collapsed structure. Mrs. Sterling cleared her throat, a delicate, impatient sound. "Well, Mr. Marcus," she prompted, tapping her diamond ring against her crystal glass. "We really must finalize the capital arrangements tonight. The Biltmore requires a wire transfer by morning to secure the grand ballroom. We assume you will contact your bank first thing tomorrow." I slowly folded my white linen napkin, placing it on the table with deliberate care. I looked at the Sterlings, and then I looked at Andre, who was already smirking in premature victory. Finally, I turned my gaze back to Kendra. My voice when I spoke was quieter than before, but it held the dense, unyielding weight of solid oak. "I will not be calling my bank tomorrow," I stated, enunciating every single word with absolute finality. "I will not be selling the house I built for your mother, and I will not be funding this extortion." Kendra blinked, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows pulling together in genuine confusion. The arrogance faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by the shock of a predator whose trap had just snapped shut on empty air. "What do you mean you will not fund it?" she demanded, her voice rising in pitch, breaking the sophisticated ambiance of the dining room. "We already signed the preliminary contracts, Dad. You have to pay for this. It is your obligation as the father of the bride." "I have no obligation to finance my own disrespect," I replied, my tone perfectly flat. "I offered you a life of stability, a foundation built on hard work and honest sweat. You chose to despise it. You look at my hands and you see dirt, but you demand the money those hands earn to buy the approval of people who look down on you." Andre leaned forward, his polished facade cracking, revealing the panicked, greedy boy underneath the expensive suit. "Now listen here, Marcus," he sneered, dropping the polite title. "You cannot just back out on us. We have a brand to launch. You are ruining our timeline." I did not even grant him the respect of looking in his direction. My eyes remained locked on my daughter. "You told me my life was worthless, Kendra." I said the words, no longer hurting, but serving as the baseline for my new reality. "You told me I was useless to your future." An engineer does not invest capital into a project that has already failed its stress test. Your demands are denied. The bank is closed. Mrs. Sterling let out a loud, theatrical gasp, clutching her pearls as if I had physically struck her. "This is an absolute outrage," she hissed, her face turning a splotchy, unbecoming red. "You are a small, selfish old man. Andre, we are leaving. I will not sit here and be insulted by a tradesman." I remained perfectly still in my chair, watching the illusion of their high society grace shatter into 1,000 cheap pieces. Kendra stared at me, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate rage. She had played her final card, the threat of social humiliation, and it had completely failed to move me. The structural integrity of her extortion plan had crumbled to dust right in the middle of the Buckhead Club. I waited, letting the reality of my refusal crush the oxygen out of the room. "You are making a massive mistake, Dad," Kendra whispered, her voice trembling with an ugly, dark fury. "You think you can just say no to me and walk away? You think you can embarrass the Sterlings and just go back to your pathetic, dusty little life? I am your only daughter. You need me." I looked at her, seeing the desperation masquerading as power. "I do not need a business partner who views my home as collateral," I answered quietly. "I needed a daughter, but she is no longer sitting at this table. The extortion ends tonight. You want the Biltmore ballroom, you pay for it yourself." I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping against the polished floor, the sound harsh and final in the tense silence. "The meeting and my role as your silent investor is officially over." Kendra slammed her hands down on the mahogany table, her designer rings clattering against the wood. "If you are going to embarrass me in front of my new family," she hissed, her voice shaking with absolute venom, "then you are no longer welcome. Do not even bother showing up to the wedding, Marcus. You are uninvited. Your presence would just be a disgusting stain on my perfect day. I stood up slowly, feeling the satisfying weight of my decision settling into my bones. I looked down at my daughter, her face twisted into a mask of pure, spoiled entitlement. I understand, Kendra. I replied, my voice as calm as a quiet morning. If my life is worthless, then my money is too. I wish you and Andre the best of luck paying for your perfect day. I turned my back on the table. I did not wait to hear Andre sputtering his empty threats. I did not look back at Mrs. Sterling, clutching her pearls in a state of manufactured shock. I walked across the plush carpets of the Buckhead Club, my heavy boots making a soft, rhythmic thud against the floor. The maitre d' gave me a confused look, sensing the storm I had just left behind in the private dining room. I simply nodded at him and pushed through the heavy glass doors, stepping out into the warm Atlanta night. The humid air hit my face, smelling of exhaust and blooming magnolia. The valet stand was crowded with imported sports cars and luxury sedans, the glittering toys of the people who had just tried to strip me down to the bone. A young valet in a red vest stepped forward, holding a ticket, expecting me to hand him a few crumpled bills for a beat-up work truck. I walked right past him. Parked in the VIP circle, idling with a low, powerful purr, was an extended black luxury sedan. The tinted windows were darker than the night sky. As I approached, the driver's side door opened instantly. A man in a sharp, dark suit stepped out, moving with the quiet efficiency of a trained professional. He did not ask for a ticket. He simply opened the rear passenger door for me, bowing his head in a gesture of profound, silent respect. "Good evening, sir," he murmured. "Good evening, Thomas," I replied, sliding into the expansive leather interior of the car. The heavy door closed with a solid, expensive thunk, instantly silencing the noise of the city outside. The cabin was a sanctuary of climate-controlled perfection, smelling of rich leather and quiet power. This was not the car of a struggling carpenter clinging to an outdated house. This was the vehicle of a man who owned the land the Buckhead Club was built on. I settled into the deep seat, the adrenaline of the dinner fading, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I pulled my phone from the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket. It was time to initiate the demolition. I scrolled to a single name and pressed the call button. The line rang exactly twice. Julian, speaking a crisp, alert voice, answered on the other end. Julian was not a neighborhood attorney. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, a man who managed empires and orchestrated corporate warfare from a glass tower downtown. "Julian," I said, leaning back against the plush headrest, watching the streetlights blur past the tinted glass. "The stress test is complete. The structure has completely failed. The daughter I raised is gone, and the people she has chosen are attempting a hostile takeover of my assets." There was a brief razor-sharp pause on the line. "I understand, Marcus," Julian replied, his voice dropping an octave, shifting instantly into a mode of total legal warfare. "What are your orders?" The city lights reflected in my eyes, cold and bright. The emotional father had been left behind in that dining room. The architect was now fully in charge. "Cancel the credit cards," I instructed, my voice devoid of any hesitation. "Freeze the joint wedding accounts immediately. Withdraw all funding guarantees for the Biltmore the Florist and the Luxury Catering Company. Lock down the title to their high-rise condo and flag both of their vehicles for immediate repossession." I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the finality of the moment settling over my chest. I gave her everything, Julian, I said softly to the empty luxury cabin, and she told me my life was worthless. It is time to show her exactly what my worth looks like. Cut the lifelines, Julian. Cut them all right now. "Consider it done, Marcus." Julian answered, the sound of rapid typing already echoing through the speaker. By tomorrow morning, they will not have a single dime to their names. I ended the call. The screen faded to black. I sat in the quiet dark of the car, rolling through the wealthy streets of Atlanta, watching the empire I had built in secret prepare to crush the ungrateful children who thought they could steal my crown. I did not need to be in her luxury penthouse to see the demolition begin. An engineer knows exactly how a structure falls once the primary support beams are removed. I could picture her morning with absolute chilling clarity. The morning sun would cut through the floor to ceiling windows of her condo, blinding and sharp. Kendra would wake up on sheets of imported Egyptian cotton, her head pounding from the vintage champagne. She would stretch her arms, a triumphant smile playing on her lips, believing she had won the war. In her mind, she had put her stubborn blue-collar father in his place and secured her absolute dominance over the wedding plans. Andre would still be asleep beside her, snoring softly into a silk pillow. She would reach for her phone on the marble nightstand, expecting a wave of congratulatory messages from her bridesmaids. Instead, she would find a screen lit up with missed calls and a stream of frantic voicemails. The first strike would come from Annette, the lead designer at the luxury floral boutique. Kendra would press play, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Miss Kendra Annette would say, her voice tight and uncomfortably formal. "I'm calling to inform you that your primary card has been declined. The $40,000 charge for the South American orchids did not go through. We need an alternative payment method immediately, or we will have to cancel the entire greenhouse order by noon." Kendra would sit up, scoffing loudly in the quiet bedroom. A bank error, she would mutter to herself, treating it as a stupid, automated fraud alert. She would tap the screen, dialing the concierge line for her exclusive platinum credit card. She would type in her account number, her annoyance growing. "We are sorry," the automated voice would drone, pausing with a chilling digital finality. "This account has been permanently closed by the primary cardholder. Please contact your bank for further details." Kendra would freeze the phone, slipping slightly in her sweaty palm. Closed. The word would echo in her mind, heavy and impossible. That card was her lifeline, the bottomless well she used for her designer clothes and her status symbols. Her phone would buzz again, an incoming call from the Biltmore Estate events director. She would answer it, forcing a sweet, polished tone. "Good morning, Charles," she would chirp, trying to mask the sudden tremor in her breath. Miss Kendra Charles would reply, his voice completely devoid of his usual warmth. "We have a severe problem. The wire transfer for the grand ballroom deposit was rejected by your financial institution. Furthermore, we received a formal notice of withdrawal from a legal firm representing a Mr. Marcus. All financial guarantees have been completely revoked." Kendra would feel a cold spike of panic pierce right through her chest. "Charles," she would stammer, gripping the phone. "There must be a misunderstanding. My father is just having a temporary liquidity issue. I will handle it today." "I'm afraid we cannot wait," Charles would state, his tone shifting into cold, hard business. "The Biltmore requires a cleared payment of $150,000 within the next 2 hours. If the funds are not secured, your reservation is canceled. Have a good day." The line would go dead, leaving her listening to the empty, mocking silence. "Wake up, Andre," she would scream, kicking the silk blankets off the bed. "Wake up right now." She would throw the phone onto his chest. "My cards are declining. The Biltmore is threatening to cancel the venue." Andre would sit up quickly, the sleep vanishing from his face, replaced by a sudden ugly panic. "What do you mean declining?" he would demand, scrambling for his own phone. "Just use the emergency corporate card your dad gave you." "I tried it," she would yell, pacing across the hardwood floor. "He closed the account, Andre. He actually cut me off. He's throwing a pathetic, childish tantrum." Andre would swipe aggressively at his phone screen, his face turning a sickly pale shade. "Let me just transfer some funds from our joint wedding account," he would mutter. He would open the banking app, waiting for the balance to load. Kendra would watch him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She needed to see those 6 figures, the safety net that proved her father was just blowing smoke. Andre would stare at the screen, his mouth falling open in silent horror. What is it she would demand, rushing over to his side of the bed? He would turn the screen toward her, his hand shaking uncontrollably. The joint wedding account, the one they had flaunted in front of their wealthy friends, would show a completely devastating absolute zero. The funds were gone, wiped out without a single trace. The reality of the morning would crash down on them like a collapsed roof. The arrogant, untouchable socialite from the night before was completely gone. My phone buzzed against the solid oak of my kitchen table, breaking the morning silence. I picked it up, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. It was Julian checking in with the precision of a military general. "The financial accounts are completely drained, Marcus," he reported, his voice crisp and strictly business. "The joint funds have been legally reverted to your primary trust. They are currently standing on 0. I nodded to myself, feeling the steam from the mug against my face. "Good work, Julian," I said, keeping my voice level. "Now initiate the property protocols. It is time they understand who actually owns the roof over their heads." I knew exactly what was happening next, because I built the system they were living in. For 3 years, Kendra had bragged to her high society friends about the luxury penthouse she and Andre had purchased. She posted pictures of the skyline views and the imported marble countertops, claiming it was the fruit of their brilliant branding agency. But the agency was a hollow shell, and the penthouse was a ghost. The deed did not have her name on it. The property was fully owned by Oak and Iron Holdings, a silent corporate entity that I controlled with a single signature. I had bought it to give my daughter a safe place to live while she built her career. I never expected her to use my quiet generosity as a weapon to mock my trade. While Julian executed the orders, Kendra and Andre were likely tearing through their closets, throwing on designer clothes in a total panic. They would be rushing to get to the bank, desperate to scream at a branch manager and fix the disastrous error. I could see the scene unfolding like a perfectly drawn blueprint. They would march to their heavy mahogany front door, Andre adjusting his silk tie, Kendra gripping her expensive leather purse. But when they pulled the handle, the door would not simply open. The electronic deadbolt controlled by the building management system would flash a solid, unyielding red light. Kendra would rattle the handle, her frustration boiling over. "Open the door, Andre." She would snap, her voice shrill with rising panic. "The system is jammed." Andre would push past her, swiping his platinum key card against the reader. It would beep a harsh, denying sound. He would try again and again, the sweat starting to bead on his forehead. "This is ridiculous," he would mutter, slamming his hand against the heavy wood. He would pull out his phone, calling the front desk concierge. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," the concierge would answer, his tone entirely devoid of its usual fawning respect. "Your electronic access has been revoked by the property holding company. You are currently locked out of the residential systems. A formal eviction notice has been slipped under your door. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises before building security escorts you out." Andre would drop the phone, his face draining of all color. He would look down, finally noticing the thick manila envelope resting on the floor mat. He would tear it open, his hands shaking violently. Kendra would read over his shoulder, her breath catching in her throat. The document was an absolute legal masterpiece drafted by Julian. It clearly stated that their tenancy was terminated effective immediately due to a breach of contract with Oak and Iron Holdings. The owner of the holding company was listed at the very bottom in clear, undeniable print. It was my name, Marcus. The father she had called a worthless, dusty carpenter was the invisible landlord of her entire fake life. "We have to get to the bank right now," Kendra would scream, pushing past him and scrambling out the emergency exit door. They would sprint down the carpeted hallway, their expensive shoes sinking into the plush fabric, abandoning their penthouse prison. They would hit the elevator button, rushing down to the private VIP parking garage. They needed their cars. They needed to drive to my house and demand answers, believing they could still bully me into submission. But the parking garage would not offer them an escape route. It would offer them a second devastating lesson in structural failure. As the elevator doors opened, the harsh fluorescent lights would reveal a scene of absolute ruin. 2 heavy-duty tow trucks were parked blocking the exit lane. The hydraulic lifts were whining, a loud mechanical sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Andre would freeze in his tracks, his eyes wide with utter disbelief. "Hey," he would yell, sprinting toward the closest truck. "What are you doing?" "Stop right there. That is my vehicle." The repo man, a large, unbothered guy in a high-visibility vest, would not even flinch. He would finish securing the thick steel chains to the front axle of Andre's least imported sports car. He would then turn, pulling a clipboard from his belt. "Are you Andre Sterling?" the man would ask, chewing on a piece of gum. "Yes, I am," Andre would pant, trying to grab the clipboard. "You are making a huge mistake. Unhook my car immediately." The man would step back, handing Andre a yellow carbon copy of the work order. "I do not make mistakes, buddy," the repo man would say, tapping the paper. "The lease on this vehicle and the luxury SUV next to it is held by Oak and Iron Holdings. The corporate office just canceled the contracts and reported the vehicles as unauthorized. I am repossessing the property under the legal orders of the owner." Kendra would stand frozen by the elevator, watching her pristine white SUV get hoisted into the air by the second tow truck. The alarms on both cars would start blaring a loud, obnoxious siren that completely destroyed the quiet exclusivity of the VIP garage. Other wealthy residents would be walking to their cars, stopping to stare at the spectacle. They would see Kendra and Andre, the self-proclaimed royalty of Atlanta society, standing helpless and red-faced while their status symbols were dragged away like garbage. The debt spiral was moving with a terrifying, undeniable speed. They had no money, no home, and no transportation. The fake wealth they had used to humiliate me had evaporated in a matter of hours. The foundation was gone and gravity was finally taking hold. The heavy metal doors of the parking garage slammed shut behind the departing tow trucks. The harsh, screeching echo of the tires faded into a thick, suffocating silence. Kendra and Andre stood frozen on the cold concrete, breathing in the bitter smell of exhaust fumes. Their imported cars, their absolute symbols of dominance, were completely gone. Kendra felt a violent tremor shake her entire body. She turned to Andre, her face pale and her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged terror. "Do something!" "Andre," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the concrete pillars. "Call your parents right now. Tell them my father has lost his mind and we need an emergency wire transfer." Andre stood completely paralyzed, staring at the empty parking spaces. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He dialed his mother, pacing in a tight, desperate circle. It went straight to voicemail. He tried his father, the wealthy patriarch of the Sterling family, but the line was completely dead. "They are not answering," he stammered, looking at Kendra with a hollow, pathetic expression. "They must be in a morning board meeting." Kendra let out a raw, frustrated scream, grabbing him by the lapels of his expensive custom-tailored suit. "I do not care about a board meeting, Andre," she yelled, shaking him. "We are homeless. We are completely broke. We have a wedding in 3 weeks, and my psychotic father just evicted us. Get me some money right now." Andre pushed her hands away, his own panic finally boiling over into a vicious defensive rage. "Do not put your hands on me, Kendra," he snapped, straightening his jacket with a trembling hand. "This is your fault. You pushed the old man too far. I told you to just play nice and flatter his massive ego until the checks cleared. You had to humiliate him at the Buckhead Club. You blew the entire deal." "I blew the deal," Kendra gasped, stepping back as if he had physically slapped her. "You sat there sipping champagne while I secured our brand." "Where is your money, Andre?" Where is this massive, generational sterling wealth you are always bragging about? Write a check right now and buy us a hotel suite. Andre looked away, his jaw clenching, a sudden slick sweat breaking out on his forehead. My assets are tied up in trust funds, Kendra, he muttered, refusing to meet her furious gaze. I cannot just liquidate capital on a Tuesday morning. It takes time. It takes legal approvals. They stormed out of the garage, pushing through the heavy fire doors and marching into the grand sunlit lobby of their building. The lobby was a massive expanse of imported white marble and sparkling crystal chandeliers. It was the absolute peak of Atlanta high society, filled with wealthy residents heading to their corporate offices or private tennis lessons. Normally, Kendra would stride through this space like a queen, greeting her neighbors with a fake, polished smile. Today, she looked like a completely deranged, terrified animal. As they approached the front desk, the head of building security, a tall, unsmiling man in a dark suit, stepped directly into their path. Miss Kendra, he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the quiet, echoing lobby. I need you to hand over your electronic key cards. Your residency has been officially terminated by Oak and Iron Holdings. Kendra felt the blood drain entirely from her face. Several residents, including a prominent socialite she had invited to the wedding, stopped by the espresso bar, turning to watch the spectacle. Excuse me, Kendra stammered, trying to lower her voice, desperate to contain the absolute humiliation. We just need to go upstairs and pack our things. This is a simple legal misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, the security chief replied, holding out his hand. The legal owner, Mr. Marcus, ordered an immediate lockout eviction. A moving company has already been dispatched to pack your belongings into a storage facility. You are trespassing on private property. Hand over the cards or I will have you forcibly removed by the police. The whispers started immediately. The wealthy neighbors leaned in their eyes wide with scandalous delight, watching the mighty Sterling couple crumble into dust. Kendra felt hot tears of pure, absolute shame stinging her eyes. She reached into her designer purse, her fingers trembling, and pulled out the platinum key card. She threw it onto the marble counter, a harsh plastic clatter. Andre tried to salvage his ruined pride, puffing out his chest and pointing a shaking finger at the security guard. You will be hearing from my lawyers, he threatened, his voice cracking slightly. We will sue this entire building into the ground. The security chief did not even blink. He just pointed a thick finger toward the revolving glass doors. The exit is right behind you, buddy, he said, completely unfazed by the empty threat. Have a nice day. Kendra spun around, grabbing Andre by the arm, dragging him toward the doors. The walk across the grand lobby felt like a slow, agonizing march to the gallows. The whispers followed them, a toxic, suffocating cloud of social death. They pushed through the revolving doors, stumbling out onto the hot, unforgiving concrete of the Atlanta sidewalk. The morning sun beat down on them heavy and oppressive. They had no cars, no keys, and nowhere to hide. Kendra looked at Andre standing on the street corner in his wrinkled, expensive suit. The polished, powerful heir to the Sterling Empire looked like a weak, pathetic child. She realized in that exact horrifying moment that he had no backup plan. He was completely dependent on his parents, and she was completely dependent on her father. They were two hollow parasitic shells, masquerading as titans. What are we going to do? Andre whispered, staring blankly at the busy morning traffic. The venue is gone. The cars are gone. Where are we supposed to go? Kendra felt a cold, dark realization settle into her bones. My father did this, she muttered, her sadness twisting instantly into a vicious, burning hatred. He planned this entire ambush. He wants to watch us beg in the street. She clenched her fists, her carefully manicured nails digging deep into her palms. But I am not going to beg Andre. I'm going to make that old, worthless carpenter pay for every single second of this humiliation. While my daughter was standing on the hot pavement staring at the ruins of her fake life, I was stepping out of a private elevator 50 stories above the Atlanta skyline. The air up here was cool and quiet. The heavy glass doors slid open, revealing the sprawling polished floor of Carter and Hayes, the most ruthless corporate law firm in the Southeast. The receptionist, a sharp young woman in a tailored suit, stood up immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Marcus," she said, her voice dropping into a tone of absolute unwavering respect. "Mr. Julian is waiting for you in the corner office." I nodded a quiet thank you, walking down the long hallway, my heavy work boots sinking into the thick imported carpet. I pushed open the heavy oak doors, stepping into a room that commanded a view of the entire city. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a cup of black coffee in his hand, looking down at the crawling traffic below. He turned around, a sharp, calculating smile on his face. "The demolition is right on schedule, Marcus," he announced, walking over to his massive glass desk. "The penthouse locks were changed at 8 this morning. The vehicles were towed by 8:30. The joint accounts are officially closed, and the Biltmore has canceled their reservation." I sat down in the leather chair, looking at the thick stacks of legal documents piled on his desk. Each stack represented a piece of the empire that Brenda and I had built in total silence. I am a master carpenter by trade, and I never lied about that. I love the smell of sawdust and the feeling of shaping a piece of raw timber with my own two hands. But what Kendra never understood, what she was too arrogant to ever investigate, was what I did with the money I earned. Decades ago, when Atlanta was just starting to expand, Brenda and I bought our first empty lot. We built a house, sold it for a profit, and bought 2 more lots. We kept our heads down, we drove old trucks, and we reinvested every single dollar into commercial real estate. Over 40 years, that quiet, steady work grew into Oak and Iron Holdings. The company did not just own her luxury penthouse. It owned the entire high-rise residential building. It owned the massive shopping center where she bought her designer shoes, and it owned the very land sitting right underneath the Buckhead Club. The Sterlings prided themselves on their generational wealth, boasting about their small trust funds and their leased luxury cars. They thought they were the untouchable titans of the city, looking down their noses at a dusty laborer. They had absolutely no idea that they were sitting in a restaurant paying rent directly to my silent corporate accounts. I looked at the large, architectural models displayed on the oak tables around the office. High-rise developments, sprawling commercial parks, and massive residential complexes, all of them funded and owned by the calloused hands resting quietly on my knees. I wanted her to value the sweat I said quietly, the warm memory of Brenda flashing in my mind. We wanted her to understand that a strong foundation requires hard work. We hid the massive scale of the wealth because we did not want to raise a spoiled, entitled monster. We gave her a comfortable life, paid for her education, and provided a safe luxury penthouse, hoping she would find her own purpose. Julian sat down across from me, his expression hardening into a cold, professional mask. "You raised a daughter, Marcus," he replied, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the thick glass. But the city and the greedy people she chose to worship turned her into a parasite. Julian picked up a heavy black remote, pointing it at the large screen mounted on the wall. He pressed a button, and a complicated, dense web of financial charts appeared in bright, undeniable colors. "You asked me to execute the asset freeze," Julian continued, tapping a silver pen against his legal notepad. "But as your attorney and the primary manager of your holding company, I took the liberty of running a full forensic audit on her recent activities. If you thought the wedding budget was an insult, Marcus, you need to prepare yourself for the actual truth." I felt a cold, familiar knot tighten deep in my stomach. I have spent my entire life building structures, measuring stress loads, and predicting failure points. I knew that a sudden, massive crack in the foundation usually meant rot deep inside the walls. "Show me the rot, Julian," I commanded, leaning back in the heavy leather chair. "Show me exactly how deep this infection goes." Julian clicked the remote again, pulling up a series of banking records and offshore transfer logs. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with the cold efficiency of an executioner preparing the block. "It is not just a wedding," Marcus Julian stated, his voice completely devoid of any warmth. "It is a massive coordinated theft, and it has been happening right under your nose for years." The screen on the wall shifted, displaying a massive glowing map of the city, covered in dozens of bright blue markers. Each marker represents a commercial property, a residential complex, or a piece of undeveloped land. Julian explained, his laser pointer moving steadily across the screen. "You own 30% of the downtown commercial district, Marcus. You hold the deeds to the largest shipping warehouses in the state. Your net worth is not measured in thousands or even simple millions. It is measured in the high hundreds of millions. You are one of the most powerful silent landowners in Georgia." I stared at the map, feeling the heavy weight of 4 decades of quiet, relentless labor. I remembered laying the brick for that very first warehouse, my hands bleeding, my back aching from the hot southern sun. I did it for Brenda, and I did it for our daughter. I wanted to build an absolute fortress, a financial wall so high they would never know the bitter sting of poverty. I wore old boots and drove a dusty truck because I believed in pouring every single asset back into the foundation. But a fortress is only as strong as the people guarding the inside gates. Julian clicked the heavy remote again, and the glowing map vanished, replaced by a dense, intimidating spreadsheet of bank transfers and offshore routing numbers. "I gave Kendra a management position in the residential division," I said softly, looking at the endless rows of red numbers. "I wanted her to learn the family business from the ground up. I paid her a massive 6-figure salary just to oversee simple maintenance contracts and property upgrades." Julian let out a heavy, bitter sigh, placing his hands flat on the glass desk. "She did not oversee maintenance. Marcus," he corrected, pointing his pen to a column of repeated international wire transfers. "She created phantom contracting companies. She approved completely fake invoices for roof repairs that never happened and plumbing upgrades that absolutely do not exist. She funneled the money directly out of Oak and Iron Holdings and washed it through a private account in the Cayman Islands." I felt a cold physical sickness twist deep in my gut. An engineer knows that a slow leak can destroy a building faster than a hurricane. "How much, Julian?" I asked, my voice completely stripped of any human emotion. "Give me the exact total number." Over the past 4 years, Julian read from his detailed audit notes, looking me directly in the eye. "Kendra has embezzled exactly $4.2 million. The number hit me like a swinging steel beam right to the chest. $4 million. She sat across from me at the Buckhead Club, calling me a worthless, small-minded laborer while she was actively bleeding my company dry. She demanded I sell my precious family home to pay for a $200,000 party, knowing perfectly well she had millions of my stolen money hidden in a secret offshore account. The audacity was not just insulting, it was clinically sociopathic. "Why did we not catch this earlier, Julian?" I asked, the anger finally starting to crack through my calm, collected exterior. "You are the financial watchdog of this entire empire. We run quarterly audits." Julian nodded slowly, accepting the heavy blame with a professional, grim respect. "She was incredibly careful, Marcus," he admitted, pulling up a secondary file of corporate registrations. "She used the Sterling branding agency as a front to wash the stolen funds. Andre Sterling set up the shell companies. He used his high society connections to create fake vendor identities, making the fraudulent invoices look absolutely legitimate on paper. They worked together to systematically bypass our internal security checks. We only caught it this morning because your sudden freeze on her credit cards caused a massive automated panic in her offshore accounts. The system flagged a desperate failed withdrawal attempt, exposing the entire hidden criminal network. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, looking at the ceiling, trying to process the absolute devastating scale of the betrayal. She did not just disrespect me. She robbed me blind. She used the very business skills I paid for her to learn in college to systematically dismantle her own inheritance. Julian pulled up a detailed ledger showing exactly where the $4 million went. She did not invest a single dime of it, he explained, scrolling through pages of ridiculous luxury expenditures. She spent $500,000 on private jet charters to Paris and Milan. She spent over $800,000 on designer jewelry and exclusive high-end fashion. But the absolute largest chunk of the stolen capital went directly to fund Andre Sterling. She was funding him. I realized the absolute absurdity of the situation, making me sick to my stomach. She was paying for the sports cars, the expensive custom suits, and the VIP tables at the exclusive clubs. She bought his entire fake personality with my stolen money. Exactly, Julian confirmed, tapping the glass desk with his pen. She bought her way into his elite inner circle. She used your hard-earned capital to make herself completely indispensable to a man who was nothing more than a well-dressed parasite. She believed that by funding his extravagant lifestyle, she was securing her permanent place among the wealthy elite. She was paying a massive entry fee to a club that secretly despised her. I closed my eyes, picturing her screaming at me in the restaurant. "You measure success in inches," she had said, looking down her nose at me. The absolute staggering hypocrisy of her words echoed endlessly in my mind. She was nothing but a common thief, wearing a stolen designer dress, standing arrogantly on a foundation of my blood and sweat. She had mocked the calluses on my hands while secretly living off the wealth they created. I opened my eyes, the grief completely burned away, replaced by the cold, precise focus of a demolition expert. "Prepare the legal traps, Julian." I ordered, my voice hard as cured concrete. "She wants to play the corporate game. We are going to show her exactly how the board plays." Julian pressed another button on the heavy black remote, and I watched the screen shift again. The spreadsheet of stolen money vanished, replaced by a series of dark, grainy photographs and scanned legal documents. "You understand the depth of her theft," Marcus Julian said, walking slowly around the glass desk. "But you need to understand exactly why she was stealing so aggressively. It was not just for designer dresses and private jets. It was survival." "Survival," I repeated, leaning forward in my chair. She lived in a luxury penthouse. She drove a pristine, luxury vehicle. There was no survival involved. Julian stopped pacing, looking at me with a grim, knowing expression. "That is the illusion, Marcus," he stated, his voice dropping into a serious register. "The Sterling family name carries weight in Atlanta society, but Andre is the black sheep. His father cut him off completely over 3 years ago. The branding agency is a complete failure, a hollow shell used only for laundering your stolen money. Andre Sterling is absolutely fundamentally broke." I stared at the grainy photos on the screen. They showed Andre sitting at dimly lit tables surrounded by hard-looking men. He did not look like the polished aristocrat from the Buckhead Club. He looked sweating, desperate, and completely trapped. "He has a severe, crippling gambling addiction," Julian explained, tapping the screen with his pen. "He started at the high-stakes poker rooms and private underground clubs around the city. When he lost his own trust fund, he started borrowing. He did not go to a bank, Marcus. He went to a very dangerous, very quiet underground gambling syndicate." I felt a cold chill settle into the quiet office. A syndicate, I asked, the reality of the situation sinking deep into my bones. "You are telling me my daughter is marrying a man who owes money to organized crime?" Julian nodded, pulling a thick red folder from his desk. He opened it, sliding a stack of promissory notes and intercepted text messages across the glass. "Not just any mob, Marcus. This is a violent, well-organized criminal enterprise operating out of the shipping warehouses. Andre owes them precisely $2.8 million. He has been using Kendra and your embezzled money to make the minimum monthly payments just to keep them from breaking his legs. I picked up one of the printed text messages, reading the crude, violent threats directed at the man who was supposed to be my son-in-law. The puzzle pieces suddenly locked together, forming a horrifying, structurally unsound picture. Kendra did not just buy his fake love. She bought his physical safety. She was stealing my life savings to pay off a criminal syndicate. The wedding was the ultimate cash out. Julian continued, his voice tight with professional concern. The extravagant budget, the demand for you to sell your house and fund the joint accounts. They were planning to take that massive lump sum, pay off the syndicate completely, and flee the country on their European honeymoon. That is why they were so incredibly desperate at the restaurant. They were running out of time. I let the paper drop back onto the desk, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of the truth. My daughter was not just a spoiled brat throwing a tantrum over a party. She was a desperate accomplice in a high-stakes, criminal survival game. She looked me in the eye, called my life worthless, and demanded I sell the home I built with Brenda to save the life of a degenerate gambler. She crossed a line, Julian. I said, the anger burning cold and bright in my chest. You do not bring criminals to my doorstep. You do not risk the foundation of this family to save a parasite. Julian closed the red folder, looking at me with absolute seriousness. The situation is escalating rapidly, Marcus, he warned. The syndicate knows about the wedding. They were expecting a massive payout by the end of this week. Now that you have frozen the accounts and cut off the stolen funds, Andre has no way to pay them. The timeline has completely collapsed. I stood up from the leather chair, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window. I looked out over the sprawling city of Atlanta, seeing the buildings I helped construct, the empire I quietly ruled. The structural failure of my family was complete, but the collateral damage was just beginning. Let the timeline collapse, Julian, I ordered, keeping my eyes on the distant skyline. I'm not a bank for criminals, and I am not a safety net for thieves. They built this trap with their own hands and their own greed. Now they are going to have to survive it alone. Julian tapped the heavy glass desk, pulling my attention away from the sprawling city skyline. We do not have to wait long to see the fallout, Marcus, Julian said, his voice dropping into a quiet, clinical tone. He pointed his silver pen toward a secondary monitor mounted on the far wall. I own the security systems for the entire downtown commercial district, and Julian had full access to the surveillance network. The screen displayed a live high-definition feed from a concrete parking structure located just 3 blocks away from the penthouse they were just evicted from. I watched the screen, seeing my daughter and her worthless fiancé wandering into the dark, echoing garage. They were looking for a cab or a place to hide away from the glaring eyes of the public street. Andre was pacing frantically, swiping at his phone, while Kendra stood near a concrete pillar, clutching her designer purse like a shield. Suddenly, a massive black SUV sped into the frame, its tires screeching against the painted concrete. It did not park. It swerved violently, cutting off their only exit path, and slammed to a halt right in front of them. Kendra jumped back, a scream clearly forming on her lips, while Andre froze, completely solid, his face turning the color of wet ash. The heavy doors of the SUV swung open, and 2 men stepped out into the dim fluorescent light. They did not wear expensive tailored suits like Andre. They wore thick leather jackets and moved with a heavy, brutal purpose. These were not bankers or polite society friends. These were the collectors, the violent hands of the underground gambling syndicate coming to balance the ledger. Andre took a pathetic, stumbling step backward, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. One of the men, a massive enforcer with a scarred face, closed the distance in 3 long strides. He did not say hello, and he did not ask for permission. He reached out with a thick, calloused hand, grabbing Andre by the collar of his custom silk shirt and slammed him violently against the concrete pillar. Julian reached across his desk and pressed a button on a digital audio console. "We cloned his phone hours ago, Marcus," Julian explained, adjusting the volume dial. "The microphone is live." The audio crackled through the office speakers, filling the quiet room with the harsh, echoing sounds of the parking garage. "Please listen to me," Andre begged, his voice high and thin, completely stripped of his usual arrogance. "I have the money. I just need a little more time. My father-in-law is a millionaire. He's going to pay for the wedding. We are transferring the funds this week." The enforcer leaned in close, pressing his forearm directly against the throat of my future son-in-law. "Your father-in-law just locked you out of your shiny apartment," the enforcer growled, his voice a deep, rough rumble. "He canceled your cars and he emptied your little joint bank account. We have people inside the banks, Andre. We know you are completely broke. You are playing games with our money, and the boss is absolutely done waiting." Kendra stood frozen just a few feet away, her eyes wide with a pure, unadulterated terror. She finally understood that the polished, wealthy prince she had stolen millions for was nothing more than a desperate, drowning rat. She saw the violent, ugly reality of the world she had bought her way into. "I swear to you," Andre choked out, struggling to breathe against the heavy pressure on his windpipe. "I can get it. I will get it today. Just let me talk to the old man. I will make him pay." The enforcer let out a short, cruel laugh, stepping back and letting Andre slide down the concrete pillar, gasping for air. "You do not have time to talk to anyone," the enforcer stated, looking down at the pathetic man on the ground. "You owe $2.8 million. The boss is calling in the entire debt. You have exactly 48 hours, Andre. 48 hours to deliver the cash in full. Or we are not going to take your cars. We are going to take your life." The enforcer turned slowly, locking his cold, dead eyes onto Kendra. She shrank back against the wall, trembling violently, realizing she was now a permanent part of this deadly equation. "And if he does not pay, sweetheart," the man added, his voice dripping with a quiet, lethal promise, "we will come collecting from you too. You like stealing from your daddy to pay for this garbage. You better steal a little faster." The two men climbed back into the heavy SUV, slamming the doors shut. The engine roared and the vehicle sped away, leaving thick black tire marks on the concrete floor. The garage fell completely silent save for the sound of Andre coughing and sobbing on the dirty ground. I watched the screen, my face a mask of cold, unyielding stone. My daughter had traded the safety of my foundation for the toxic, crumbling ruins of a criminal debt. She had called my life worthless, but my life was the only thing standing between her and an underground grave. Julian muted the audio, the silence rushing back into the glass office. "The clock is officially ticking, Marcus," Julian said, crossing his arms over his chest. 48 hours until the syndicate executes the collection order." I kept my eyes on the monitor, watching Kendra slowly sink to her knees beside the ruined man she had chosen, over her own blood. "She is about to learn," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of pity, "that the real world does not accept fake apologies or bounced checks. Let the clock tick, Julian." The cold reality of the concrete garage pressed down on them like a physical weight. Kendra stared at Andre, watching the polished, arrogant prince of Atlanta society completely unravel on the dirty floor. His custom suit was smeared with motor oil, and his breath came in ragged, pathetic gasps. "Get up, Andre," she commanded, her voice trembling, but laced with a new sharp edge of survival. "We cannot stay down here." They stumbled out of the parking structure, blending into the busy downtown foot traffic, looking over their shoulders at every passing black vehicle. They ducked into a small, greasy diner on the corner, a place Kendra would have normally refused to even look at. They slid into a sticky vinyl booth, hiding in the dim, flickering light of a broken neon sign. The waitress poured 2 mugs of bitter burned coffee and walked away without a second glance at the ruined couple. Kendra gripped her warm mug, her manicured nails digging into the cheap ceramic. $2.8 million. Andre, she whispered, leaning across the scratched table. You told me the branding agency was just experiencing a temporary cash flow issue. You told me your trust fund was locked in probate. You lied to me for 3 entire years. You are not a wealthy heir. You are a degenerate gambler drowning in mob debt. Andre stared into his black coffee. His shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. I had to keep up appearances, Kendra, he mumbled, wiping a streak of sweat from his forehead. The Sterling name is everything in this city. If my father found out about the syndicate, he would have publicly disowned me. I thought I could win it back. I thought if we threw this massive, high society wedding, the cash gifts, and the corporate networking would cover the spread. I just needed your father to fund the baseline, and we would have been completely clear. Kendra felt a sickening, twisting sensation in her gut. She had embezzled $4 million from her father, funneling it into offshore accounts and fake vendor invoices, all to build a brand that was nothing more than a desperate criminal cover-up. She had burned her relationship with the only man who truly loved her, the man who built an empire with his bare hands to buy the affection of a complete fraud. A normal person, a daughter with a shred of morality, would have walked away. She would have left Andre in that greasy diner, gone back to her father, and begged on her hands and knees for forgiveness. But Kendra was too far gone. The poison of entitlement had completely rotted her foundation. She looked around the cheap diner, smelling the stale grease and the bleach, and a violent, absolute panic gripped her heart. She could not go back to being the daughter of a carpenter. She could not face the social humiliation of her wealthy friends, finding out she was broke, evicted, and engaged to a criminal. The fear of poverty was stronger than her fear of the syndicate. She looked at Andre, the pathetic, broken man she was tethered to, and her mind began to race with a dark, calculated desperation. We cannot run, Andre, she stated, her voice dropping into a cold, flat whisper. The syndicate will find us, and my father will make sure we do not have a single dime to hide with. He froze the accounts because he knows about the embezzlement. He is a ruthless, meticulous man, and he is going to crush us into dust. Andre looked up, and his eyes wide and completely hopeless. Then we are dead, Kendra. He whimpered, a tear slipping down his cheek. We have exactly 48 hours before those men come back and kill us both. Your father will not give us a single penny now. He completely cut us off. He cut off the wedding accounts, Kendra corrected, a dark, dangerous spark igniting in her eyes. But he cannot cut off his entire estate. I am his only child. I am the sole legal heir to the Oak and Iron Holdings empire. He owns hundreds of millions of dollars in commercial real estate and liquid assets. That money belongs to me, and I'm not going to let a stubborn, resentful old man take it away just to teach me a lesson. Andre wiped his face, looking at her with a confused, frantic expression. But he hates us, Kendra. He practically laughed at us at the Buckhead Club. He will never sign over a check to save my life. I know he will not sign it willingly. Kendra replied, leaning closer, the scent of expensive perfume mixing with the diner grease. That means we are done asking for his permission. He called my life worthless and he evicted me onto the street. He declared war on us and now we are going to fight back. We just need to take control of his assets permanently. How? Andre asked, his voice shaking with a new terrifying realization. He is sharp, and he has the best lawyers in the city. Kendra took a slow, deliberate sip of the bitter coffee, her mind fully embracing the total moral collapse of her character. We have 48 hours to seize his empire, Andre, she said quietly. We are not going to ask him for a check. We are going to legally take his entire life right out from under him. Julian and I sat in the glass office, listening to the live audio feed from Andre's cloned phone. The diner was noisy, but their desperate whispers cut through the static perfectly. I heard my own daughter, the child I had protected her entire life, casually suggest stealing my entire empire. She did not want to apologize. She wanted to declare me mentally incompetent. They left the greasy diner, and the GPS tracker on the phone showed them moving toward the dark edge of the city. They were heading to a district of Atlanta that high society socialites usually avoided at all costs. They walked into a rundown medical clinic tucked between a dusty pawn shop and a barred liquor store. It was not the kind of place that catered to the Sterling family. It was a place where desperate people bought illegal prescriptions and fake medical documents. The audio feed picked up the sound of a heavy door closing and a buzzing, fluorescent light overhead. Dr. Evans Andre said, his voice shaking as he spoke to the man across the desk. "I need a massive favor, and I'm willing to pay top dollar for it." Dr. Evans was a disgraced physician, a man who lost his hospital privileges years ago for writing fraudulent prescriptions. I heard him shuffle some papers on his desk, letting out a dry, rattling cough. "You are completely broke, Andre," the doctor replied, his tone dismissive and bored. "Word travels fast in this city. You owe the syndicate millions and your credit is entirely garbage. I do not do charity work for dead men." Kendra stepped up to the desk, her voice cold and completely devoid of any morality. "We do not need charity," she stated, followed by the sound of a heavy metal object hitting the desk. "We need a formal medical diagnosis." I watched the GPS coordinates pulse on the screen, picturing her sliding Andre solid gold imported watch across the table. It was the only asset they had left that was not tied to my frozen accounts. The doctor paused, the sound of him examining the expensive watch echoing through the cloned phone. "This is a nice piece," the doctor muttered, his tone shifting from bored to interested. "What exactly kind of diagnosis are we talking about here?" "It is for my father," Kendra said, her voice dropping into a vicious, calculated rhythm. "Marcus. He is in his late 60s and his mental state is completely deteriorating. He is paranoid, he is having violent outbursts, and he is forgetting basic financial details. He just locked us out of our apartment in a fit of absolute delusion." I sat in my leather chair, staring out at the city skyline, feeling a profound, chilling numbness. She was not just plotting a theft. She was erasing my entire identity. She was going to use my age, the very years I spent building her comfortable life, as a weapon to destroy my freedom. "You want a dementia diagnosis?" the doctor concluded, his voice low and conspiratorial. "You want me to sign a sworn medical affidavit stating that your father is suffering from severe rapid onset dementia, making him completely unfit to manage his own estate?" "Exactly," Andre chimed in, the panic in his voice replaced by a sickening, greedy hope. "If we have that document, we can file for an emergency conservatorship. We can seize control of his holding company and liquidate his assets to pay off the syndicate. We just need your medical license on the paperwork to make it completely legal." The doctor let out a short, greedy laugh. "That is a massive felony, Andre." He warned, the sound of a drawer opening and closing. "Forging a psychiatric evaluation to steal a multi-million-dollar real estate empire carries serious prison time. This watch is nice, but it does not cover that kind of extreme risk." Kendra did not hesitate for a single second. "Once we liquidate his primary accounts," she promised, her voice dripping with absolute malice, "we will wire you $100,000 in completely untraceable funds. We have exactly 48 hours before the syndicate comes back. We need that document signed and notarized by tomorrow morning." The silence in the clinic stretched out heavy with the weight of absolute betrayal. "Deal," the doctor finally agreed, the sound of a pen scratching against thick paper. "I will draft the psychological profile tonight. I will backdate the symptoms to make it look like a progressive, undeniable mental collapse. Your father will not even know what hit him. Julian reached over and muted the audio feed. The glass office was completely quiet again. He looked at me, a deep professional disgust etched onto his face. "They are going for a full conservatorship," Marcus Julian said, shaking his head. "They are going to try and have you legally declared incompetent." I stood up from my chair, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored suit. I did not feel fear, and I did not feel grief. I felt the cold, hard certainty of a foundation that was about to drop, a crushing weight right onto a pair of arrogant thieves. Let them forge the papers Julian ordered, walking toward the heavy oak doors. Let them dig the trap as deep as they want. They are going to need the space for their own funeral. The sun began to set over the Atlanta skyline, casting long, dark shadows across the city. I left Julian in his high-rise office and drove back to my empty house in the quiet suburbs. The house was exactly as I had left it, sturdy, silent, and built to last. I walked into my home office, a room filled with blueprints and heavy oak cabinets I'd carved myself. I sat down at my desk, opening up my secure laptop, linking directly to the surveillance network Julian had established. The audio feed from the cloned phone crackled to life once again. Kendra and Andre had left the crooked doctor and retreated to the empty, hollow shell of their branding agency. It was a rented office space downtown filled with expensive modern furniture, but absolutely zero actual clients. The microphone picked up the frantic clicking of a computer mouse and the harsh hum of a laser printer. "We need the standard legal templates," Andre muttered, his voice echoing in the empty room. "Power of attorney, medical proxy, and a full transfer of deed. The doctor will backdate his dementia diagnosis, but we need your father to actually sign these specific forms to make the conservatorship bulletproof." I listened to the rustling of thick paper, feeling a deep, quiet anger settling into my bones. My own daughter was standing in a fake office, printing out the legal theft of my entire life. "He's not just going to sign a power of attorney." Kendra snapped the sound of her pacing across the hardwood floor. "He is a meticulous, paranoid engineer. He reads every single line of a contract before he even picks up a pen. If he sees the words medical proxy, he will throw us out of the house and call his own lawyers. We have to bury the trap." Andre replied, his voice taking on a slimy, manipulative edge. "We take the standard, boring vendor releases from the wedding. The caterer liability forms the venue insurance waivers, the massive stacks of legal garbage that nobody ever actually reads. We slip the power of attorney pages right into the middle of the stack. We print them on the exact same heavy stock paper." I heard the printer spit out another batch of documents. The sound was like a nail gun firing directly into my chest. "I will tell him I am desperate." Kendra plotted, her tone shifting into a sickening fake sweetness. "I will tell him the Biltmore is threatening to sue us for breach of contract because of the canceled wire transfer. I will turn on the tears and beg him to just sign the liability releases so we do not go to jail for fraud. He is angry, but he still thinks he is the protector of this family. If I play the helpless, terrified little girl, his arrogant savior complex will kick right in. She knew me so well, and yet she knew absolutely nothing about me at all. She thought my love for her was a predictable, exploitable weakness. She thought the father who wiped her tears when she fell off her bicycle was stupid enough to blindly sign away a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. "Make sure the signature lines are perfectly aligned," Kendra ordered, her voice completely stripped of any human emotion. "The bank needs to see a clean, unquestionable stroke of the pen. Once he signs that bottom line, we take the papers straight to the Fulton County Courthouse. The judge will see the doctor sign transfer of power, and he will grant us emergency total control of Oak and Iron Holdings. And then we pay the syndicate." Andre breathed out a heavy sigh of pure selfish relief. "We wire the $2.8 million directly to their offshore accounts, and we get on a plane to Europe. He will be locked up in a senior care facility before he even realizes his bank accounts are completely empty." I closed my eyes, leaning back in my heavy leather desk chair. They had crossed the final unforgivable line. It was no longer a dispute over a wedding budget or a simple case of ungrateful disrespect. It was a cold, calculated, and entirely vicious criminal conspiracy. They were planning to steal my wealth, strip me of my legal rights, and lock me away in a medical prison, all to save the life of a degenerate gambler. The audio feed picked up the sound of a stapler driving sharp metal into the thick stacks of paper. The trap was officially constructed. They had forged the bait, and they were preparing to walk directly into the lion den. I reached over, turning off the live audio feed, letting the quiet peace of my home wash over me. I did not need to hear any more of their pathetic, desperate scheming. I stood up, walking out of my office and into the large, empty living room. I needed to prepare the staging ground. If my daughter wanted to put on a theatrical performance of a helpless, weeping child, then I was going to give her the greatest, most devastating stage she had ever stepped onto. I picked up my phone, dialing Julian one last time for the evening. The forged documents are printed, I told him, looking around the quiet house I had built with Brenda. They are coming here tomorrow to execute the signature trap. Julian did not hesitate. The legal countermeasures are ready, Marcus, he replied, his voice sharp and absolute. We will be watching every single move they make. Let them come, I said, hanging up the phone. The house was silent, but the foundation was completely perfectly ready for war. The morning sun cast a bright, glaring light over my driveway. I walked out the front door, locking the heavy deadbolt behind me, and stepped into my old work truck. I did not drive to a construction site or to Julian High-Rise office. I drove exactly 3 blocks away and parked under the shade of a large oak tree. I pulled a sleek, high-definition tablet from my glove compartment, resting it on the steering wheel. The screen flickered, displaying a grid of 8 crystal-clear camera feeds covering every single angle of my home. I had installed the system years ago to protect Brenda-prized antiques, never imagining the primary thief would be our own flesh and blood. I sat in the quiet cab of the truck, sipping lukewarm coffee, and I waited. It took exactly 45 minutes. A cheap rented sedan pulled up to the curb, idling roughly. Kendra stepped out of the passenger side, looking around the quiet suburban street like a terrified burglar. Andre stayed in the driver's seat, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel, his eyes darting frantically. Kendra walked up the driveway, her expensive designer heels clicking against the concrete. She pulled an old brass key from her purse. It was the emergency key I gave her in high school, a symbol of absolute trust. She slipped it into the lock, turning it with a sharp, guilty click. The tablet screen showed her stepping into the foyer, closing the door softly behind her. I watched my daughter standing in the home I built, breathing heavily, preparing to assassinate my character. She did not waste any time. She moved straight into the kitchen, pulling a plastic grocery bag from her oversized purse. She reached inside and pulled out 3 empty orange prescription bottles. She placed one on the marble counter right next to the coffee maker. She opened a drawer and casually tossed the other 2 inside, making sure they looked carelessly forgotten. The audio feed from the living room camera picked up her ragged, nervous breathing. She pulled a pad of yellow sticky notes and a black marker from her bag. She started writing, pressing hard against the paper. I zoomed in on the kitchen camera, reading the crude, forged handwriting. Remember to turn off the stove, one note read, slapped aggressively onto the stainless steel refrigerator. Call the bank about the missing money, another note said, stuck to the edge of the kitchen table. She was creating a physical, undeniable trail of severe, progressive dementia. She was writing the script for the crooked doctor to use in court. She walked over to the gas stove, reaching out with a trembling hand. She turned the front burner dial just enough to let a faint hiss of gas escape without sparking the flame. It was a vicious, lethal touch. She was going to tell the judge that I was a physical danger to myself and to the neighborhood. She was building a case for an emergency, involuntary psychiatric hold. I watched her move into my study, the room where I spent decades drawing blueprints and building our future. She swept her arm across my heavy oak desk, knocking a stack of perfectly organized files onto the floor. She picked up a blueprint for a new commercial center and crumpled it violently into a ball, tossing it into the corner. She wanted the room to look chaotic, the physical manifestation of a broken, senile mind. Then she stopped in front of the fireplace mantel. Resting on the polished wood was a silver-framed photograph of Brenda. It was taken on our 20th anniversary, Brenda smiling with that warm, radiant light that always made a house feel like a home. Kendra stared at the photo of her mother, her face twisting into a cold, unrecognizable mask. She wrote one final sticky note, her hand moving with a cruel, calculated speed. She slapped the yellow paper directly onto the glass of the frame, covering Brenda's face. I zoomed in on the mantle camera, my heart turning to absolute ice. The note said, "Where did Brenda go?" My own daughter was using the profound grief of losing my wife as a cheap prop for a medical fraud. She was pretending that I was so far gone I had forgotten that the love of my life was dead. The absolute cruelty of that yellow piece of paper severed the very last microscopic thread of paternal mercy in my soul. There was no going back from this. She was not just a thief anymore. She was a monster willing to desecrate a grave to save a gambling addict. Kendra took out her cell phone, snapping dozens of pictures of the staged chaos. She photographed the fake notes, the open pill bottles, the messy desk, and the cruel note on Brenda picture. She was gathering the visual evidence to present to the Fulton County judge. Once she had enough photos, she turned around and practically ran out of the house, terrified of being caught in her own trap. I heard the front door slam shut and the lock click back into place. I watched the rented sedan speed away down the street, carrying the two criminals back to their fake office. I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the empty, silent house on my tablet screen. The setup was completely finished. The stage was set with the props of my supposed madness. I put the tablet back into the glove compartment and started the engine. I drove back to my house, unlocking the front door and stepping into the staged crime scene. I did not clean up the mess. I did not turn off the hissing gas until I had walked through the kitchen, taking my own mental inventory. I left the empty bottles and the yellow notes exactly where she placed them. I walked into the study, looking at the crumpled blueprints on the floor. I walked over to the mantel and I gently peeled the cruel yellow note off the glass of Brenda's picture. I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into my suit pocket. I would save that note for the absolute final blow. I sat down at my desk, smoothing out a fresh sheet of paper. They wanted to play a game of helpless, senile old men. I was going to give them an award-winning performance, and I was going to make sure the trap snapped shut so hard it would shatter their teeth. The afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the staged wreckage of my living room. I sat in my heavy armchair, the rough fabric familiar against my hands, waiting for the final act of their pathetic play to begin. I did not have to wait long. The front doorbell chimed, a sharp, cheerful sound that completely contradicted the absolute malice standing on my porch. I did not get up immediately. I let it ring a second time, forcing them to stand in the southern heat, sweating in their cheap rented clothes. Finally, I pushed myself out of the chair, forcing my knees to tremble just a fraction of an inch. I dragged my heavy boots across the hardwood floor, opening the heavy oak door with a slow, deliberate creak. Kendra stood on the porch, holding a thick manila folder clutched tight against her chest. Andre hovered nervously behind her, his eyes darting toward the street, terrified that the syndicate was watching from a parked car. Dad Kendra breathed out, her voice cracking with a perfectly executed theatrical sob. She did not look like the arrogant socialite from the Buckhead Club. She looked small, defeated, and completely desperate. She wore a simple, unbranded dress, and her makeup was carefully smudged, exactly like a woman who had been crying for 2 days straight. I stepped back, leaving the door open, letting them walk into the trap they had built with their own hands. I did not say a word. I just looked at her, my face a carefully constructed mask of tired confusion. I let my shoulders slump, playing the part of a broken, exhausted old man who could not comprehend the chaos around him. They stepped into the foyer, and Kendra immediately began scanning the room, her eyes locking onto the empty pill bottles on the kitchen counter. A microscopic, triumphant gleam flashed in her eyes before she buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, dramatic wail. "Oh, Dad," she cried, rushing forward and throwing her arms around my neck. "I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry for everything I said at the dinner." I stood completely rigid, feeling the toxic, fake warmth of her embrace. I breathed in the scent of her expensive perfume, the very perfume she bought with my stolen money, and I felt nothing but a cold, absolute disgust. I patted her back slowly, my hand shaking just enough to sell the performance of a frail father eager to forgive his prodigal daughter. "It is okay, Kendra," I whispered, my voice intentionally raspy and weak. "We all say things we do not mean." She pulled back, wiping a fake tear from her cheek, her face the absolute picture of a loving, traumatized child. "I was just so stressed about the wedding, Dad," she babbled, leading me back toward the living room armchair. "Andre and I were completely overwhelmed, and I took it all out on you. You're the only person who has ever truly protected me, and I treated you like garbage." Andre stood awkwardly by the doorway, gripping his hands together, sweating profusely under the weight of his criminal debt. He forced a pathetic, weak smile. "We really are sorry, mister." Marcus Andre chimed in, his voice shaking. "We were completely out of line." I sank back into my armchair, letting my head loll slightly to the side, staring blankly at the messy coffee table. "The house is a little disorganized today," I mumbled, waving a trembling hand toward the crumpled blueprints and the scattered sticky notes. "I cannot seem to remember where I put my reading glasses." Kendra knelt on the floor, right next to my chair, placing the thick manila folder on my lap. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, playing the helpless victim to absolute perfection. "It does not matter, Dad," she cooed, placing her hand gently over my calloused knuckles. "We are here to help you clean up, but we have a terrible, massive emergency, and you are the only one who can save us." I looked down at the folder, letting my brow furrow in deep, manufactured confusion. "An emergency," I repeated, making my voice sound hollow and scared. "What happened, Kendra? Are you in trouble?" She nodded frantically, squeezing my hand tight. "The Biltmore estate, Dad," she explained, her voice dropping into a panicked, breathless whisper. "When you canceled the wire transfer, they completely panicked. They are threatening to sue Andre and me for massive criminal fraud. They say we booked the venue with malicious intent, and they are going to call the police by tomorrow morning." I watched her lie straight to my face, using the very crisis I created to bait the legal trap. Andre stepped closer, nodding emphatically. "It is true, sir," he added, pulling at his collar. "They are demanding personal liability waivers, holding us legally responsible for the entire catering and floral budget. If we do not submit the signed releases by tomorrow, they are going to press charges." Kendra tapped the manila folder, resting heavy on my knees. "I just need you to sign these standard vendor releases, Dad," she begged, a fresh wave of fake tears spilling down her cheeks. "The lawyer said that since you were the primary financier on the original contract, your signature will legally release us from the fraud charges. It just transfers the liability back to the corporate entity so nobody goes to jail." I looked at the folder, knowing exactly what was hidden inside. The dementia diagnosis, the power of attorney, the complete transfer of my entire multi-million-dollar real estate empire. It was all bundled neatly inside a fake, desperate plea for a father protection. She thought I was a senile, trusting fool. She thought the trap was absolutely perfectly set. I reached out my fingers, trembling violently, and rested my hand on the edge of the folder. I looked at my daughter, the thief, the liar, and the absolute traitor to her own blood. "Let me see the papers, Kendra," I said quietly, ready to deliver the performance of a lifetime. "Let me see what I need to sign to keep my little girl safe." Kendra opened the manila folder on my lap, her hands moving with a rushed, nervous energy. She pulled out a thick stack of papers, placing a heavy brass pin right on top of the pile. The white pages stood out sharply against the worn fabric of my old armchair. "It is just standard legal jargon, Dad," she cooed, her voice sickly sweet and completely dripping with fake concern. "The lawyers write these things just to confuse normal people like us." I picked up the first page, squinting my eyes hard, bringing the paper so close to my face that it practically touched my nose. I let my hands shake, making the paper rustle loudly in the quiet living room. "What does this long paragraph say right here?" I muttered, pointing a trembling finger at a random block of text near the top margin. Kendra leaned in instantly, her body tense, subtly blocking the rest of the page with her forearm. "Oh, that is just the floral vendor release," she explained smoothly, her lies flowing like poisoned honey. "It just states that the boutique cannot hold you personally liable for the imported orchids we had to cancel. You do not even need to read it all, Dad. It is just boring boilerplate text." I nodded slowly, letting my arm drop back to my knee in a gesture of absolute total exhaustion. I let out a heavy, ragged sigh. "And what about the luxury catering company?" I asked, my voice wavering perfectly. "Are they going to try and sue my little girl for breach of contract?" Andre took a sudden step closer, wiping a thick bead of sweat from his forehead. "Not if you sign these waivers, Mr. Marcus," he urged, his voice tight and practically vibrating with barely concealed panic. "We just need your immediate authorization on the bottom line, and this entire legal nightmare completely disappears. We can all just move on and let you rest." I watched Kendra carefully flip past the first few dummy pages, her fingers moving with the practiced skill of a confident con artist. She revealed the heavy stock paper, the documents hidden directly in the center of the massive stack. I knew exactly what I was looking at despite my foggy, confused expression. I saw the legal header for the medical proxy and the absolute total transfer of Oak and Iron Holdings. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger right at the bottom signature line of the fraudulent power of attorney. "Sign right here, Dad," she instructed softly, pressing the heavy brass pen directly into my calloused palm. "Just sign your full name right on this line and you can go right back to sleep. I will take care of the lawyers and handle everything else for you." I held the pen, letting my hand tremble violently so much that the brass barrel tapped an erratic, nervous rhythm against the thick paper. "I am just so tired, Kendra," I whispered, staring blankly at the forged documents that would supposedly steal my freedom. "My head feels incredibly foggy today. My memory is slipping away." "Are you absolutely sure this is the right thing to do?" She placed her hand over mine, her grip surprisingly strong, driven by a pure criminal desperation. "I am absolutely sure, Dad," she promised, looking me directly in the eyes without a single blink of hesitation. "I would never let anything bad happen to you. I love you. You just have to trust me like you always have." The absolute stunning audacity of her lie echoed loudly in the staged chaos of my living room. She was looking into the eyes of the man who raised her, and she was calmly, surgically stripping his entire life away. I looked past her to Andre, who was staring at the brass pin in my hand as if it were the only life raft in a violent, deadly ocean. "Okay, sweetheart," I mumbled, lowering the pen slowly toward the thick stock paper. "If it keeps you out of a jail cell, I will sign whatever you need me to sign." I slowly moved the heavy brass pen, hovering it just above the thick paper. My right hand, the hand that had swung hammers and built houses for 40 years, trembled with a perfectly calculated weakness. I let out a soft, confused groan, dropping the pen onto my lap. I acted as if the simple weight of the brass was too much for my failing muscles to bear. Kendra gasped, her hands hovering over the documents. She was terrified that her multi-million-dollar prize was slipping away. "Come on, Dad," she urged, her voice tight with a sickening, desperate patience. "You just need to grip it a little harder. Let me help you guide the pen." No, sweetheart, I mumbled, slurring my words slightly. I made my eyes wander around the staged, chaotic living room, looking completely lost. My right hand is just cramping so badly today. The arthritis is terrible. I will just use my left hand. Andre shifted his weight, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the hardwood floor. Can he even sign a legal document with his left hand, Kendra? He whispered loudly. The sheer terror of the syndicate deadline was making him careless. What if the bank rejects the ink? Shut up, Andre, she hissed back, her polished mask slipping for just a fraction of a second. Any signature is better than nothing. The doctor will testify that his motor skills are rapidly declining. It just adds to the medical proof of his severe dementia. I picked the brass pen back up, gripping it awkwardly with my left hand. I'm naturally right-handed, and I've never signed a single official document with my left. But Julian and I had prepared for this exact specific moment. Years ago, when we restructured Oak and Iron Holdings, I officially registered a highly specific biometric signature with the state trust. Any deviation, especially a wildly erratic left-handed scrawl, would be instantly flagged as fraudulent. It would be legally nullified by the primary holding bank. I pressed the nib of the pen against the crisp white paper. I dragged the ink across the signature line, creating a shaky, jagged, completely illegible mess. It looked exactly like the desperate failing handwriting of a man losing his mind. I did not just sign my name. I signed an old defunct alias. It was a variation of my middle name that I had legally retired over a decade ago. It was a ghost signature, completely useless, but beautiful to the eyes of a greedy thief. Here's the first one, sweetheart, I whispered, letting the pen slip from my fingers again. Are there any more floral releases? Kendra eagerly snatched the signed power of attorney, her eyes practically glowing with a dark, victorious fire. Yes, Dad, she cooed, sliding the medical proxy directly under my hand. Just 2 more quick signatures and you are completely safe from the Biltmore lawyers. I picked up the pen again, repeating the clumsy left-handed forgery. I signed away my medical rights, creating another jagged, worthless scrawl. I signed the absolute transfer of my property deeds, putting my useless ghost signature on the very documents that were supposed to steal my entire life. Every single drop of ink was a heavy steel bar, locking them permanently inside a federal fraud case. There you go, Kendra. I breathed out, leaning my head back against the armchair. I closed my eyes in a display of total pathetic exhaustion. I hope that keeps my little girl out of trouble. I'm just going to take a long, quiet nap now. Kendra quickly gathered the thick stack of papers, tapping them against the coffee table. Her hands were shaking with pure, unadulterated adrenaline. Thank you so much, Dad, she whispered, slipping the forged documents back into the manila folder. You saved us. You really saved us. We will let you sleep now. Andre let out a massive, shuddering breath, the tension leaving his shoulders in a sudden rush. He looked at the manila folder as if it contained a winning lottery ticket, instead of a direct ticket to a state penitentiary. We need to go, Kendra, Andre whispered, tugging gently on the sleeve of her cheap dress. We have to get these filed downtown before the courthouse closes. Kendra stood up smoothly, the act of the weeping daughter instantly vanishing from her posture. She looked down at me, resting in my chair with a cold, triumphant smirk. She truly believed that she had just conquered the empire, leaving a broken, senile carpenter entirely at her mercy. Have a good sleep, Dad, she said, her voice dropping its fake sweetness, returning to the arrogant, polished tone from the Buckhead Club. I kept my eyes closed, listening to the sound of their footsteps moving quickly away from my chair. I did not move a single muscle, acting completely dead to the world around me. The trap was sprung. The bait was taken, and the predators were entirely blind to the massive steel jaws closing around their throats. I heard the heavy oak front door pull shut, the brass latch clicking firmly into place. The moment the lock engaged, the oppressive fake energy in the room completely evaporated. I did not stay slumped in my armchair. I opened my eyes, the dull, confused foam instantly clearing from my vision. I stood up my back, perfectly straight, the supposed arthritis in my knees entirely vanishing. I walked with a steady, quiet purpose across the hardwood floor, moving toward the front window. I pulled the edge of the heavy linen curtain back just a fraction of an inch, keeping myself perfectly hidden in the deep shadows of the living room. Outside in the bright afternoon sun, the theatrical performance was completely over. Kendra and Andre were walking down the driveway toward their cheap rented sedan. They were not walking like terrified, desperate victims anymore. They were strutting. Andre practically skipped his expensive leather shoes, tapping a joyful, arrogant rhythm against the concrete. He threw his arms up in the air, a massive, greedy smile stretching across his face. "We actually did it, Kendra." Andre laughed, his voice carrying clearly through the thin glass of the window. "We own the entire holding company. We have the keys to the castle, and we did not even have to fight him for it." Kendra held the manila folder tight against her chest, treating it like a holy relic. She stopped at the passenger door, turning around to look back at the house. Her face was completely stripped of the weeping daughter mask. What remained was a cold, calculating predator admiring her successful kill. She looked at the sturdy brick walls I had laid with my own hands, and she let out a sharp, mocking scoff. "He was so incredibly pathetic, Andre," she sneered, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "He could not even hold the pen straight." I almost felt bad for a second watching him mumble like a confused toddler. But this is just business. He is a relic, and it is time for the new generation to take over the capital. Andre leaned over the hood of the car, grinning like a complete fool celebrating their successful felony. "We file these at the courthouse first thing tomorrow morning." Andre planned his panic, entirely replaced by a sickening swagger. "We get the judge to stamp the emergency conservatorship, we wire the syndicate their money, and we are on a first-class flight to Paris by Friday night. The old man can rot in a nursing home for all I care." I watched them climb into the sedan, the engine sputtering to life and driving away down the quiet suburban street. I let the linen curtain fall back into place, sealing the bright sunlight out of the room. I stood in the quiet darkness, feeling a profound, absolute calm. They thought they had just stolen a multi-million-dollar real estate empire with a few fake tears and a cheap brass pen. They had absolutely no idea that they were holding a folder full of completely worthless paper signed by a ghost. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk. I pulled out my tablet, checking the security feeds one last time. The hidden cameras had captured every single second of their malicious visit. The high-definition lenses had recorded Kendra pushing the forged power of attorney, and the audio microphones had captured her lying about the Biltmore lawyers. It was a flawless, undeniable digital record of elder abuse and attempted grand larceny. I picked up my phone, dialing Julian private line. The call connected instantly. "They took the bait, Julian," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of any old age frailty. "They have the left-handed signatures, and they are planning to file the emergency conservatorship at the courthouse tomorrow morning." Julian let out a low, dark chuckle on the other end of the line. "Excellent work, Marcus." Julian replied, the sound of legal briefs rustling in the background. "I have the countersuit completely prepared. The trust documents are sealed and the biometric signature flags are active. When they present those forged papers to the judge, they are going to trigger a massive federal fraud alert." "I want to be there, Julian," I stated, looking around the staged mess of my living room. "I want to look her in the eye when the foundation finally collapses on top of her. I will arrange it, Marcus." Julian promised. "I will see you at the Fulton County Courthouse tomorrow. We are going to bring the whole structure down." I hung up the phone, feeling the final heavy steel beam lock into place. The trap was not just set. It was primed, loaded, and waiting for the absolute perfect moment to snap shut. My daughter thought she was the architect of my destruction, but she was just a foolish laborer building her own prison cell on my property. The heavy mahogany doors of the Fulton County Courthouse stood tall and imposing. The air inside the courtroom was cold, smelling of old paper and stale floor wax. I sat in the very back row of the gallery wearing a faded, oversized cardigan sweater. I slouched my shoulders, letting my head hang low, staring at the scuffed toes of my work boots. To anyone looking at me, I was just a sad, broken old man, completely unaware of the legal execution happening in front of him. But my mind was sharp-focused and absorbing every single detail of the room. At the front of the courtroom sat Judge Harrison. He was a stern, gray-haired man, known for his absolute lack of patience. Behind the plaintiff table, my daughter Kendra stood dabbing her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue. Andre sat next to her wearing a brand new custom-tailored suit, practically bouncing his leg up and down with nervous greed. They had hired a slick, expensive downtown lawyer, a man named Vance, to completely steamroll the legal proceedings. The judge banged his wooden gavel, a sharp, echoing crack that silenced the quiet murmurs in the room. "This is an emergency petition for absolute conservatorship," the judge announced, looking down at the thick stack of forged documents on his desk. "The petitioner is Kendra, the biological daughter of Marcus. You are claiming that your father is a sudden, extreme danger to himself and his estate." Kendra took a deep, shaky breath, gripping the edge of the wooden table. "Yes, Your Honor," she whispered, her voice cracking with a perfectly rehearsed theatrical sorrow. "It is the hardest thing I have ever had to do. My father was a brilliant, hard-working carpenter. He built a beautiful life for us. But the man sitting in the back of this room is no longer my father. His mind is completely gone." She turned around, pointing a trembling finger at me. I let my jaw go slack, staring blankly at the ceiling, playing the hollow shell she wanted the judge to see. She turned back to the bench, letting a single fake tear roll down her cheek. "It started a few weeks ago," she lied, her voice echoing in the large, solemn room. "He started forgetting names and wandering around the house in the middle of the night. But yesterday, it escalated into a complete, terrifying crisis." The judge adjusted his heavy glasses, looking over the forged medical affidavit. "I see a sworn statement here," the judge noted, tapping the paper. "A Dr. Evans claims he is suffering from rapid onset advanced dementia." Kendra nodded frantically, clutching her tissue. "Yes, Your Honor," she confirmed, leaning closer to the microphone. "I went to his house yesterday to check on him. I found empty prescription bottles scattered all over the kitchen. He had turned on the gas stove and just left it running. If I had not walked in when I did, he would have blown up the entire neighborhood. He was completely unaware of the danger. He was just sitting in his chair, talking to my mother." She paused, letting out a loud, dramatic sob, covering her face with her hands. "My mother passed away 5 years ago, Your Honor," she cried, her voice muffled by her fingers. He put a sticky note on her picture asking where she went. It broke my heart into a million pieces. He is entirely disconnected from reality. I listened to her weave the lies, feeling a cold, dark void where my paternal love used to be. She was weaponizing my grief, twisting the beautiful memory of Brenda into a cheap legal strategy. She was putting on a masterclass in manipulation, playing the burdened, selfless child, sacrificing her own happiness to protect her sick father. She was building the prison walls around me brick by brick with every single fake tear. Andre stepped up right behind her, placing a comforting, supportive hand on her shoulder. "We are just terrified for his safety, Your Honor." Andre chimed in, projecting an image of the perfect, caring son-in-law. "He has massive financial responsibilities. He owns properties, and he is signing checks that make absolutely no sense. We need to freeze his estate and transfer the legal authority to Kendra before he bankrupts himself or hurts an innocent person. The judge looked down at the forged power of attorney, the very document I had sabotaged with my left hand. "And you have a signed medical proxy?" the judge asked, looking directly at Kendra. "You claim he signed these transfers of power willingly." He had a brief moment of clarity. "Your Honor?" Kendra answered smoothly, not missing a single beat. I sat down with him, and I cried. I begged him to let me help him. He realized he was losing his mind, and he signed the papers to protect the family. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. But he knew what he was doing in that one fleeting moment. "Please, Your Honor," she begged, looking up at the bench with wide, pleading eyes. "Give me the legal authority to put my father in a safe, secure medical facility. Let me take over the holding company so I can protect his legacy. Do not let him destroy everything he worked so hard to build." The courtroom fell completely silent. The performance was flawless. She had painted the perfect picture of a tragic, unavoidable mental decline. She stood there bathing in the sympathetic gaze of the judge, entirely convinced that she had just won the war. As she thought the gavel was about to fall in her favor, completely unaware of the absolute devastation waiting just outside the heavy oak doors. Judge Harrison let out a heavy sigh, looking down at Kendra with a soft, paternal pity. "Thank you for your bravery, Kendra," the judge said, his voice echoing in the large room. "I know how painful it is to watch a strong parent decline." Attorney Vance, the expensive downtown lawyer Andre had hired, stepped out from behind the heavy wooden table. He buttoned his custom suit jacket, projecting an aura of absolute legal authority. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice slick and incredibly confident. "We are not just dealing with a sad family tragedy today. We are dealing with an immediate, severe public safety hazard." Vance walked over to the evidence projector, sliding a glossy photograph onto the glass. The large monitors in the courtroom flickered to life, displaying the staged wreckage of my kitchen. I looked up from my scuffed boots, watching my own daughter lie through high-definition evidence. "This is Exhibit A, Your Honor," Vance announced, pointing a silver pen at the screen. As my client testified, Mr. Marcus left a live gas burner running completely unattended. He created a massive, lethal explosion risk for a residential neighborhood full of innocent families. Vance swapped the photo, replacing it with the image of my study. The crumpled blueprints and the scattered files filled the screen. "Exhibit B, Your Honor." The lawyer continued, his tone dripping with professional concern. "His cognitive decline is not just physical. It is entirely financial. He has completely lost the ability to manage his own basic affairs." Vance turned his back to the judge, looking directly at the gallery, making sure the few spectators felt the full weight of his argument. "Recently, Mr. Marcus has exhibited wildly erratic financial behavior. He canceled massive, legally binding vendor contracts for his only daughter's upcoming wedding without any rational explanation. He closed critical bank accounts and locked his own family out of their residential properties. He is burning through his estate, acting on violent, paranoid delusions." I kept my head down, letting my shoulders shake slightly as if I were a confused, terrified old man listening to a foreign language. Andre nudged Kendra under the table, a smug, victorious grin spreading across his face. "They were absolutely destroying my character, painting me as a senile menace to society." Your Honor, Vance pushed forward, walking back to the bench. "We have presented a signed medical diagnosis from a licensed physician. We have provided photographic proof of his dangerous living conditions. And most importantly, we have the signed legal consent of Mr. Marcus himself. He signed the power of attorney and the medical proxy because deep down he knows he needs absolute intervention." The lawyer picked up the heavy manila folder, holding it up like a trophy. "We humbly request that this court grants an immediate total conservatorship to Kendra. We need the legal authority to place Mr. Marcus in a secure, specialized memory care facility today." Furthermore, we request emergency executive control over Oak and Iron Holdings to stop the financial bleeding and protect his life savings. Judge Harrison nodded slowly, his mind clearly made up. He picked up his own heavy pen, pulling the emergency order toward him. This is a very clear, very unfortunate case of advanced cognitive failure, the judge stated, looking over the paperwork one last time. The court recognizes the severe danger and commends the daughter for stepping in to handle this heavy burden. Kendra let out a loud, relieved sigh, collapsing back into her chair. Andre grabbed her hand, squeezing it tight, his eyes practically turning into dollar signs. They had won. The gavel was about to fall, and the $2.8 million syndicate debt was about to be paid with my stolen empire. I'm prepared to sign the emergency conservatorship order, Judge Harrison announced, hovering his pen over the final signature line. I stopped shaking. I lifted my head, my eyes completely clear, and I looked directly at the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. I did not need to say a single word. Before the judge could touch the ink to the paper, the heavy oak doors of the courtroom flew open. They did not just open. They crashed backward, hitting the wooden stops with a loud, violent boom that shook the entire gallery. Kendra whipped her head around, her fake tears instantly drying up. Andre jumped in his seat, a sudden cold panic flashing across his face. Judge Harrison dropped his pen, staring over his glasses at the completely unexpected interruption. Standing in the doorway, framed by the bright light of the hallway, was Julian. He did not look like a polite corporate attorney. He looked like the absolute grim reaper wearing a three-piece tailored suit. In his right hand, he held a massive, thick leather briefcase. It was the heavy artillery loaded and ready to completely level the courtroom. I asked the court to immediately halt these proceedings, Julian announced, his voice booming across the quiet room, carrying the weight of a 10-ton concrete slab. Julian strode down the center aisle, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the polished marble floor. He did not ask for permission to approach the bench. He marched directly past the gallery, ignoring the shocked gasps of the spectators. Attorney Vance jumped up from his chair, his face flushed with sudden indignant rage. "Objection, Your Honor," Vance shouted, waving his hand toward the back of the room. "This man is interrupting a sealed emergency medical hearing. Have the bailiff remove him immediately." Judge Harrison raised his hand, silencing the panicked lawyer. "Who are you, sir?" the judge demanded, looking down at Julian with a sharp, calculating stare. "And what is your legal standing in this courtroom?" "My name is Julian," he replied, his voice calm but echoing with absolute authority. "I am the primary legal counsel and chief financial officer for Oak and Iron Holdings. I represent the man sitting in the back row, Mr. Marcus. And I am here to inform this court that the entire petition sitting on your desk is a massive coordinated criminal fraud." Kendra let out a sharp, terrified gasp, sinking back into her wooden chair. Andre turned completely white, his custom suit suddenly looking 3 sizes too big. They stared at Julian as if a ghost had just walked into the room carrying their death warrants. "Fraud is a very heavy accusation, counselor," Judge Harrison warned, leaning forward over his heavy wooden desk. "You better have the evidence to back it up, or I will hold you in contempt of court." Julian placed his massive leather briefcase on the defense table, the heavy brass lock snapping open with a loud final click. "I do not deal in accusations, Your Honor," Julian stated, pulling out a thick stack of blue legal folders. "I deal in forensic accounting and structural reality." Julian walked up to the bench, handing the first thick folder directly to the judge. "The petitioners are requesting executive control over the assets of Oak and Iron Holdings," Julian explained, pacing slowly in front of the panicked couple. "They claim they need this conservatorship to protect my client life savings. But there is a massive structural flaw in their entire legal strategy." Vance slammed his hand on his table, trying to regain control of his crumbling case. "My clients have assigned power of attorney," Vance argued, pointing a shaking finger at Julian. We have the legal right to those assets. You have a piece of worthless paper, Julian shot back, turning to look directly at Kendra. Because as of 3 days ago, Marcus does not own a single dime of oak and iron holdings. He does not own the commercial real estate, and he does not own the liquid capital. The courtroom fell dead silent. Kendra's eyes widened in absolute unadulterated horror. What do you mean he does not own it? She whispered, her voice completely stripped of its fake theatrical sorrow. Julian turned back to the judge, a cold, victorious smile on his face. 3 days ago, my client executed a total permanent transfer of his entire estate. Julian announced, his voice ringing loud and clear. He placed every single asset, every property deed, and every bank account into a blind, irrevocable, charitable trust. The trust is fully sealed and legally untouchable. You cannot claim conservatorship over assets that simply do not exist in his name. Judge Harrison opened the blue folder, scanning the official trust documents. He looked up, his expression shifting from paternal pity to a sharp judicial anger. These trust documents are fully verified, the judge confirmed, tossing the papers onto his desk. The estate is permanently locked. The power of attorney you submitted is entirely useless. Andre gripped the edge of the wooden table, his knuckles turning pure white. The $2.8 million lifeline had just been legally vaporized right in front of his eyes. He let out a low, panicked whimper, his chest heaving as the reality of the syndicate deadline crashed down on his head. But Julian was not finished. He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a bright red folder. He was not just dismantling their theft, he was dropping the entire building right on top of them. Furthermore, Your Honor, Julian continued, his voice dropping into a lethal surgical tone. The power of attorney they presented today is not just legally nullified, it is a documented, undeniable forgery. Objection. Vance screamed, his slick confidence entirely shattered. You have a signed document with his name on it. You have a document signed with his left hand, Julian corrected, pulling out a certified biometric signature analysis. And he signed it using a defunct, legally retired alias. He knew exactly what these two criminals were planning, and he deliberately gave them a ghost signature, because he knew they were too blinded by their own greed to ever check the fine print. Kendra felt the room spinning around her. The flawless trap she thought she built was actually a cage, and her father had just locked the door from the outside. And why would a daughter go to such extreme criminal lengths to steal from her own father, Julian asked, holding the red folder high in the air for the entire gallery to see. Why would she hire a disgraced crooked doctor to forge a dementia diagnosis? Vance packed his briefcase, shaking his head. I did not know anything about a forged medical document, Vance stammered, actively backing away from his own clients. Julian ignored the panicked lawyer, walking directly up to Andre. Because her fiancé, Andre Sterling, is not a wealthy society heir, Julian revealed, dropping the heavy bomb right in the middle of the courtroom. He is a degenerate gambler who currently owes $2.8 million to a violent underground gambling syndicate. They are not trying to pay for a wedding, Your Honor. They are trying to steal my client's entire empire to stop the mob from breaking his legs. Julian opened the red folder, spreading the intercepted text messages, the illegal promissory notes, and the syndicate threat logs right across the plaintiff table. The paperwork covered the polished wood, creating a massive, undeniable map of their absolute moral failure. Judge Harrison looked at the evidence, his face turning bright red with a righteous judicial fury. He looked at Kendra, who was openly weeping now, not with fake theatrical tears, but with the raw, ugly panic of a cornered animal. The dominoes had officially fallen. The false foundation was completely destroyed, leaving them exposed, broke, and entirely ruined. Judge Harrison slammed his hand down on the heavy oak desk, the loud smack echoing like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. He glared down at Kendra, his eyes burning with absolute judicial disgust. You submitted a sworn medical affidavit to this court. The judge growled, his voice vibrating with a dangerous, quiet fury. You testified under oath that your father was a danger to himself and his community. Are you telling me this entire petition is based on a fabricated criminal lie? Kendra shrank back into her wooden chair, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy strands across her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, breathless whimper came out. Andre was completely paralyzed beside her, staring blankly at the red folder of syndicate debts, realizing his life was essentially over. Julian did not give them a single second to breathe or invent another desperate excuse. We have one final piece of evidence, Your Honor. Julian announced, his voice slicing through the heavy tension of the room. A visual confirmation of the exact precise depths of this conspiracy. Julian turned toward the large, flat screen monitor mounted on the courtroom wall. He pulled a small silver flash drive from his tailored pocket and plugged it directly into the evidence projector. I would like the court to review the high-definition security footage from my client living room, Julian requested, tapping the keyboard. The screen flickered and the bright, crystal-clear image of my own kitchen appeared. The timestamp in the corner proved the video was recorded just 24 hours ago. The entire courtroom watched in absolute stunned silence as the digital version of my daughter walked through my front door. They watched her pull the empty orange prescription bottles from her designer purse. They watched her scatter them deliberately across the marble counter, creating the perfect fake mess of a senile mind. A collective horrified gasp rippled through the small gallery behind me. Attorney Vance, the slick downtown lawyer, physically took 2 steps away from the plaintiff table, completely distancing himself from the radioactive fallout of his own clients. The video cut to the living room camera. The screen showed Kendra scribbling frantically on the pad of yellow sticky notes. The high-definition lens zoomed in, perfectly capturing her handwriting, the fake warnings about the gas stove and the bank accounts. But the absolute devastating kill shot of the footage was yet to come. The camera angle shifted to my study, focusing directly on the fireplace mantel. The courtroom watched as my own daughter picked up the silver-framed photograph of Brenda, my late wife. They saw the cold, completely emotionless look on Kendra's face as she slapped the cruel yellow note right over Brenda's beautiful smile. Judge Harrison let out a sharp, disgusted breath, shaking his head in total disbelief. That is enough, the judge muttered, the anger in his voice completely undeniable. But the video was not finished. Julian pressed forward, keeping the evidence playing for the entire room to witness. We need the court to see the actual signing of the forged documents. The footage jumped forward to the afternoon. It showed me sitting in my heavy armchair playing the frail, confused old man to absolute perfection. It showed Kendra kneeling next to me, sliding the fraudulent power of attorney onto my lap and pressing the heavy brass pen into my hand. The courtroom listened to the clear, crisp audio, hearing her lie about the Biltmore lawyers and the fake breach of contract lawsuit. Then the camera zoomed in tight on my hands. It captured the exact deliberate moment I switched the pen to my left hand. It showed me looking directly at Kendra, asking if she was absolutely sure about what she was doing. It showed her looking right back into my eyes and lying without a single shred of hesitation. The video ended, the screen fading to a solid, undeniable black. The silence in the Fulton County courthouse was so thick you could practically choke on it. The illusion was completely, permanently shattered. The helpless, weeping daughter was exposed as a vicious, calculating predator. The concerned son-in-law was revealed to be a desperate, drowning criminal, willing to steal an old man's life to pay off a mob debt. Kendra buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent, ugly sobs. She was not crying for me, and she was not crying for her mother. She was crying because she had finally hit the concrete bottom of her own greedy trap. She knew she was not walking out of those heavy oak doors to a life of luxury and high society parties. Julian closed his massive leather briefcase, the loud click echoing in the quiet room. The defense rests, Your Honor. Julian stated, adjusting his suit jacket and stepping back from the bench. We respectfully request that you deny the petition for conservatorship and refer these two individuals to the district attorney for immediate criminal prosecution. Judge Harrison took off his heavy glasses, rubbing his eyes with a deep, profound exhaustion. He looked down at Kendra and Andre with a gaze that held absolutely zero mercy. In all my years on the bench, the judge began, his voice cold and flat, I have never seen a more disgusting predatory abuse of the legal system. You attempted to use this court to steal a multi-million-dollar estate and illegally imprison a perfectly healthy man. I stopped slouching in the back row. I placed my hands on the wooden pew in front of me, and I slowly pushed myself to my feet.